At the height of the harvest feast, when drums echoed through the village square and fires painted dancing shadows on ancient walls, Nayara returned early from the river. What she saw turned her blood to ice. There, beside the largest fire where all could witness, her husband Kanu sat entangled with his mistress, their bodies pressed close, laughter spilling from their lips like poison. Villagers froze mid-dance, their eyes darting between the shameless pair and the approaching wife. Nayara stood motionless, her water pot slipping from trembling fingers. The clay shattered, yet no one heard it over the crackling flames. Kanu's gaze found hers across the firelight. For one breathless moment, she believed shame would strike him. Instead, his lips curled into a cruel smile, and he pulled the mistress closer, tighter, deliberately. The feast held its breath. Then Kanu spoke, his voice carrying over the silent drums, words crafted to destroy. "Look well, Nayara. This is what a man does when his wife forgets her place." The mistress's laughter cut through the silence like a blade through silk, high and mocking, designed to wound. Kanu rose slowly, adjusting his wrapper with casual cruelty, as if public shame were his right to distribute. He stepped toward Nayara, each footfall deliberate, each movement calculated to humiliate. "You exist because I allow it," he declared, his voice reaching every corner of the gathering. "Remember that when you wake. Remember that when you sleep. You are here by my permission alone." The drums, those ancient messengers of celebration, remained silent. Even the fire seemed to dim its fury. The village elders, seated beneath the talking tree, exchanged glances heavy with foreboding. Nayara stood perfectly still, her face a mask neither angry nor broken. No tears fell, no words escaped. She simply looked at Kanu as if memorizing something she would soon forget. Then, without a sound, she turned and walked into the darkness beyond the firelight. One elder whispered to another, his voice carrying on the wind. Silence like that never ends quietly. But this story did not begin with betrayal. Once, Nayara was known throughout 3 villages as the woman whose kindness could heal wounds words alone could not touch. Years before, when Kanu was merely a struggling farmer with more debts than crops, it was Nayara who fed him from her own portion when his harvests failed. She prayed at dawn for his seeds to take root, knelt by his sickbed when fever claimed him, and stood firm beside him when other men mocked his failures. Her love was not the soft, fleeting kind sung about in moonlight. It was the sturdy love that builds homes and weathers storms. When creditors came demanding payment, Nayara sold her mother's silver bangles without hesitation. When neighbors whispered that Kanu would never prosper, she worked twice as hard, planting hope where others saw only dust. Love, they say, can lift a man from poverty. And so it did. But no one warns you what happens when that same man forgets who held the ladder. Prosperity arrived slowly at first, then all at once like rain after drought. Kanu's harvest grew abundant, his compound expanded, his voice grew louder at village gatherings. With success came subtle changes Nayara noticed but chose not to name. He began returning late from the market, smelling of palm wine and unfamiliar perfumes. Her counsel, once sought eagerly, was now brushed aside like dust from a wrapper. "You worry too much," he would say, waving her concerns away. "I am a man now. I know what I am doing." The mistress entered his life like smoke through a crack, slowly, then everywhere. She was younger, louder, and understood the art of feeding a man's ego until it swallowed his conscience. She praised his strength, his wisdom, his importance, all the things Nayara had stopped emphasizing because she believed he already knew his worth. Pride, that ancient poison, began its work. Nayara sensed the danger approaching like distant thunder, but she chose patience, believing love would remember itself. She would learn too late that some men mistake patience for permission. The crossing from disrespect to outright betrayal happened gradually, then suddenly. Kanu stopped hiding his late nights and strange absences. He stopped making excuses. One evening, when Nayara quietly asked where he had been, he laughed in her face. "What will you do about it?" he challenged, his eyes cold as river stones in winter. "Leave? Go where? To do what?" He leaned closer, his breath heavy with palm wine. "You are too gentle, too soft. You will swallow your pride like you always do, cook my meals like you always do, and wake beside me like you always do, because that is who you are." Nayara said nothing. She simply returned to her cooking fire, stirring the pot with steady hands while something inside her shifted, silent and final. The night of the harvest feast arrived with drums and dancing, with fires lit and food aplenty. Fate, that patient weaver, settled in to watch. Everything that rises without gratitude must eventually fall. The only question was how far and how hard. Morning arrived with unusual quiet. The village awoke expecting shouting, tears, perhaps even violence spilling from Kanu's compound. Instead, an eerie calm settled over everything like morning mist. Nayara rose with the sun as always, but her movements carried a different quality, purposeful, deliberate, final. She did not prepare Kanu's morning meal. She did not fetch water for his wash basin. She did not lay out his working clothes or offer the morning blessing wives traditionally spoke over their husbands. Kanu stirred, confused by the silence, and found his corner of the compound empty of care. No food warming by the fire, no wife awaiting his needs, just absence, complete and absolute. Nayara moved through the compound like a stranger, occupying the same space, her eyes passing over him as if furniture, unimportant and unnoticed. By midday, the village understood what she had done. The elders gathered beneath the talking tree, their faces grave with recognition. "She has invoked the old separation," one murmured, his voice heavy with ancient knowledge. "She has withdrawn her blessing completely." Kanu laughed when he understood Nayara's intentions, a loud, false sound meant to convince himself more than others. "A wife is replaceable," he announced to anyone who would listen, strutting through the market with forced confidence. "Let her sulk. I have better company now." He spent the day with his mistress, eating food she prepared, accepting her exaggerated attentions. But by evening, something felt wrong. His body grew heavy, as if invisible weights hung from his limbs. His appetite vanished, despite not eating since dawn. Food tasted like ash in his mouth. When he tried to sleep, rest refused to come. He tossed on his mat, drenched in sweat despite the cool night air. Near midnight, he rose to relieve himself and noticed something that froze his blood. His shadow, cast by moonlight against the compound wall, was wrong. It moved a heartbeat too slow, following his movements with unnatural delay. He spun quickly to catch it. The shadow jerked to match his position, but not quite right, never quite right. Kanu backed toward his hut, skin crawling with nameless dread. The mistress woke screaming 3 nights running, thrashing against invisible hands, crying about rivers running dry and pots shattering before her eyes. "I see her," she gasped to Kanu, her eyes wild with terror. "I see her standing by the water, watching, always watching." Her sleep-deprived face grew gaunt, her once bright laughter now absent. On the 4th day, seeking comfort, she reached for Kanu's hand. The moment their skin touched, cold shot through her fingers, not the cold of cool water, but the deep, bone-penetrating cold of graves and forgotten places. She yanked her hand back as if burned, though her skin had gone ice-white instead. "What has she done to us?" she demanded, her voice climbing toward hysteria. Fear replaced desire in her eyes when she looked at Kanu now. Where she once saw strength and prosperity, she now saw something cursed, something dangerous to be near. That evening, she went to Kanu's compound and screamed accusations across the walls. "Witch! Nayara is a witch. She has cursed us with dark medicine." But Nayara, sitting calmly inside, simply continued her weaving, her face peaceful as still water. Kanu stormed before the Council of Elders the next morning, his voice loud but his hands trembling. She must be forced to return to her duties, he demanded, pointing toward his compound where Nayara remained. "I am her husband. The law says she must obey. Make her stop this madness." The eldest among them, a man whose beard had turned white before Kanu was born, regarded him with eyes that had witnessed countless such moments. "Tell us, Kanu," he said softly, "did you not break this bond first? Did you not shame her before the entire village at the harvest feast? Did you not declare in front of witnesses that she exists only by your permission?" Kanu's mouth opened and closed like fish pulled from water. Another elder spoke, his voice firm. "This bond was broken publicly by your hand. The consequences must therefore answer publicly. We will not interfere." Kanu looked from face to face, searching for sympathy, finding only closed doors. Even those who once called him friend now looked away. The realization settled over him like a burial shroud. He was completely, utterly alone. Within a week, disaster bloomed across Kanu's once fertile land. The crops that had stood tall and green began turning pale, their leaves curling inward as if recoiling from poisoned soil. He dug into the earth with desperate hands and found his planted seeds rotting, oozing black liquid that stank of decay. His neighbors who once borrowed his tools and shared his harvest celebrations now avoided walking past his farm. Whispers followed him through the market like persistent flies. "Cursed," they muttered. "A man who shames his blessing will lose everything." Children who once ran to him now hid behind their mothers' wrappers. Even the compound animals grew restless, his goat refusing to eat, his chickens producing no eggs. Then came the morning Kanu woke to find his voice completely gone. He opened his mouth to call for water, but no sound emerged. For 3 full hours, he remained mute, his throat working frantically, producing only silence. When his voice finally returned, it came as a painful rasp, and he knew, truly knew, that something had fundamentally broken in the invisible world that governs all visible things. Nayara walked to the river at dawn, as was her custom, seeking the peace that only flowing water provides. There, seated on the ancient washing stone where generations of women had knelt, sat a figure neither young nor old, her ageless face reflecting the river's wisdom. Nayara had never seen her before, yet felt she had always known her. "The village talks of curses," the river woman said without greeting, as if continuing a conversation already begun. "But they misunderstand. You have cursed nothing. You have simply stopped blessing." She regarded Nayara with eyes that seemed to hold centuries. "Most women never learn what you now know, that power is not in striking back. Power is in choosing what you will no longer carry." The river flowed between them, constant and patient. "But understand this clearly," the river woman continued, her voice growing solemn. "Your choice in the coming days will decide his fate completely. The door you close will not open again. The blessing you withdraw will not return. Choose with your full heart, daughter, for the Spirit's honor, only truth." Kanu appeared at Nayara's door for the first time since the harvest feast, his proud shoulders now hunched, his confident stride reduced to an uncertain shuffle. He knelt, actually knelt in the dust outside her threshold, a position his pride had never allowed him to occupy before. "Nayara," he called, his voice cracking. I was wrong. The feast, I should not have..." His apology stumbled over itself, poorly constructed, filled with justifications and excuses. "I did not mean to hurt you so deeply. I was drunk. The mistress, she manipulated me. You know I am not usually like this." He waited for a response. None came.
Please, he continued, desperation creeping into his voice. At least speak to me. Tell me what you want. I will do it. Inside, Nayara sat at her loom, her hands moving steadily through the threads, creating patterns only she could see. She heard every word. She simply chose not to respond. As the sun climbed higher, Kanu's strength drained like water from a cracked pot. By midday, he could not rise. He crawled away from her door on hands and knees. The mistress lasted 3 more days before terror broke her completely. The nightmares intensified. Now she saw herself drowning in dry sand, choking on dust, reaching for water that turned to blood in her hands. The cold that seized her whenever she touched Kanu had spread, creeping up her arms like frost climbing a window. Her own family, seeing her deterioration, began whispering about the consequences of breaking another woman's home. On the morning of the 4th day, the mistress appeared in the village square and denounced Kanu publicly, her voice shrill with panic. "He tricked me," she shouted, pointing at him where he stood weak and trembling. "He said his wife meant nothing, that their marriage was already dead. He lied to me, used me, and now we are both cursed because of his wickedness." She spat in his direction, a gesture of final rejection. "I want nothing more to do with him. Let everyone know I am not his woman. I never was." By sunset, she had fled to her mother's village 3 days' walk away. Kanu stood alone in the square, stripped of both his wife's blessing and his mistress's false comfort, exposed before all who once envied him. Desperation drove Kanu to grand gestures he hoped would convince the spirits and the village of his changed heart. He commissioned a public ritual, hiring a diviner to perform cleansing ceremonies at the village shrine. He wept loudly, his cries echoing across the square, beating his chest with exaggerated remorse. "I am a changed man," he proclaimed to the gathered crowd, throwing himself prostrate in the dust. "I have seen my errors. I beg forgiveness from the gods and from my wife." The diviner burned herbs and poured libations, but the smoke rose wrong, dispersing too quickly, never reaching skyward as it should. The water poured refused to soak into the earth, instead pooling on the surface like something rejected. The crowd watched with arms crossed, their faces skeptical. They had seen too many men perform remorse as theater, only to return to cruelty once the audience dispersed. An old woman shook her head and muttered, "The spirits know performance from truth." Near the back of the crowd, the river woman stood unseen by all except Nayara. She met Nayara's eyes and slowly, deliberately shook her head. False redemption fools only the foolish. Inside her hut, Nayara fought a battle no one could witness. Memories rose like ghosts, Kanu laughing with genuine joy when his first good harvest came in. The way he once looked at her as if she hung the moon, his gentle hands when she had been ill, the man he was before prosperity poisoned his heart. Pity, that dangerous emotion, whispered temptations. He suffers now. He has learned, perhaps. But then other memories surfaced. His cruel smile in the firelight, his public declaration that she existed by his permission, the mistress's mocking laughter, the complete disregard for her dignity. The river woman appeared at her door as if summoned by Nayara's inner turmoil. "I see your struggle," she said quietly. "Let me ask you this. Do you miss the man he was, or do you fear the man he is?" The question hung in the air like smoke. One is grief, which is natural and will heal. The other is danger, which is warning you to protect yourself. Nayara closed her eyes, feeling the weight of choice settling on her shoulders like a physical burden. "What if he truly changes?" she whispered. "Then he will prove it in his next life," the river woman replied. "This one is already written." The river woman moved to the center of the room, and suddenly her form seemed to fill the entire space, ancient and powerful. "Hear me clearly, daughter, for I will speak this truth only once." Her voice carried the weight of ages. "You can restore him. The power exists within you still. One touch of forgiveness, one word of blessing, and his strength will return. His crops will grow again. His voice will steady. His shadow will follow him properly." Nayara felt hope and fear collide in her chest. But, the river woman continued, her eyes boring into Nayara's soul, you can only do this once. Once given, the blessing cannot be withdrawn again. If you restore him now, you bind yourself to accept whatever he becomes afterwards. If his gratitude fades, if his cruelty returns, if he shames you again, you will have no power to protect yourself. The weight of this truth pressed down like a stone. And understand this, the river woman continued, her voice growing solemn. I can only appear to those whose hearts are pure in their choosing. If you save him from guilt or fear or pity, the restoration will fail and you will lose even yourself. Outside, the village waited. Inside, Nayara stood at the crossroads of mercy and wisdom, where only she could decide which path her feet would take. It happened at sunset during the village gathering, in the very spot where Kanu had humiliated Nayara weeks before. He had dragged himself there, drawn by some desperate instinct that his redemption must occur where his sin was committed. The same fire that had illuminated his shame now cast shadows across his collapsed form. Kanu's body gave out completely, his legs folding beneath him, his proud frame crumpling like wet clay. Please, he gasped, his voice barely audible. Someone bring Nayara. I am dying. I need her. Please. His hands clawed at the dust, his breathing labored and shallow. The crowd gathered, forming a circle around him, their faces showing neither satisfaction nor sympathy, just a neutral observation of consequences arriving at their appointed hour. Someone ran to fetch Nayara. The elders remained seated, unmoving, their silence speaking volumes. Kanu wept, no longer performing, but genuinely terrified, finally understanding that pride cannot save a man when fate comes to collect. All eyes turned toward the path from Nayara's compound, waiting. The fire crackled, the drums stayed silent, and Kanu lay in the dust,
reduced to begging for the very blessing he had once claimed to own. Nayara emerged from the shadows, walking slowly toward the gathered crowd, her white wrapper glowing in the firelight like a spirit manifesting. Silence fell so complete that every breath could be counted. The villagers stepped aside, creating a path that led directly to where Kanu lay trembling. This was the moment everyone expected, the moment stories always promised. The gentle wife, having made her point, would now show mercy. The elders nodded approvingly, already composing the lesson they would teach about forgiveness. Even the skeptical old women allowed small smiles, thinking perhaps this story would end as it should. Kanu looked up at Nayara with desperate, red-rimmed eyes, his hand reaching toward her feet. Please, he whispered, I know I was wrong. I know I hurt you. I am sorry. I am truly, truly sorry. Save me. Please save me. His tears were real now, his terror genuine. Nayara stood over him, her face peaceful and unreadable. For a long moment, no one breathed. Then she knelt down beside him, close enough that he could feel her warmth. Hope blazed in his eyes. The village leaned forward, waiting for the blessing to be spoken, for forgiveness to flow like healing water. Nayara's voice, when she spoke, was calm as still water and just as deep. I need you all to understand something clearly, she said, addressing not Kanu, but the entire gathered village. I did not curse this man. I spoke no evil words. I prepared no dark medicine. I called upon no spirit to strike him down. She looked around the circle of faces, meeting each gaze steadily. I simply stopped carrying him. A gasp rippled through the crowd. For years, I blessed his food, his water, his walk, his sleep. I prayed for his success, covered his flaws, forgave his cruelties, and bore his disrespect. I carried him on my back like a mother carries a child, and he grew so accustomed to being carried that he forgot he had legs of his own. Her voice never rose, never sharpened with anger. She simply spoke truth like one states facts. When I set him down, his own weight collapsed him. When I withdrew my blessing, his own choices consumed him. I cursed nothing. I simply stopped blessing everything.
She stood, brushing dust from her wrapper. What you call a curse is simply a man finally carrying his own consequences. Then Nayara turned and walked away, leaving Kanu gasping in the dust, leaving the village stunned into silence, leaving behind the role of savior they had written for her. Without Nayara's intervention, without her blessing to shield him, the natural consequences Kanu had been dodging for years arrived all at once like delayed storms. His crops failed completely, not from supernatural curse, but because he had neglected proper care, trusting pride instead of work. His body weakened not from magic, but from stress, guilt, and the weight of community rejection. His voice grew hoarse not from spirit, but from the strain of begging and crying, of trying to talk his way out of what his actions had earned. He survived. The body is resilient, but he was stripped of everything that had made him feel powerful. His pride, once towering, lay shattered like pottery dropped from great height. His reputation, carefully built over years, dissolved like sugar in rain. His sense of entitlement, that false foundation he had built his life upon, cracked and crumbled. The village council delivered their judgment. He must leave until he learned what he had lost and why. Kanu was not cast out violently or ceremonially. He simply became irrelevant, and irrelevance is its own kind of exile. He had 3 days to prepare for departure. On the morning of his leaving, Kanu walked through the village he had once strutted through with head held high. Now his eyes stayed fixed on the ground, unable to meet the gazes of those who witnessed his fall. The same neighbors who had once borrowed his tools and praised his prosperity now turned away, suddenly busy with tasks that required their full attention. Children who had once run to him now watched from doorways with wide, uncertain eyes, not understanding why, but sensing something broken. He carried a single bag containing what little the elders allowed him to take. His land would be held in trust. His compound would stand empty. His name would become a cautionary tale. As he passed the center of the village, he glanced once toward the fire circle where his shame had begun and his collapse had completed itself. The fire pit sat cold and swept clean, as if even the ashes rejected his memory. No one accompanied him to the village boundary. No one wished him well. He simply walked, and the village closed behind him like water over a stone, smoothing away evidence of his passage. Somewhere behind him, the fire that never fully dies began to burn again, warming those who remained. In the weeks following Kanu's departure, something remarkable happened. The village turned not to gossip, but to Nayara, seeking the quiet strength they had witnessed. The elders consulted her on disputes, recognizing wisdom that came not from books or age, but from having walked through fire and emerged refined. Young women sought her guidance, asking not how to keep a man, but how to keep themselves whole regardless of what men did. Nayara did not become loud or prominent. She simply existed with such complete peace that her presence calmed troubled hearts. Crops that had struggled began to thrive again, not through magic, but because Nayara showed her neighbors techniques she had learned, knowledge she had always possessed but had been too busy blessing Kanu to share widely. The river, which had run low during the conflict, swelled again with seasonal rains, its waters clear and cool. Women came to wash clothes there and found Nayara often sitting by the ancient stone, and they sat with her, speaking of burdens carried and burdens released. One morning, they came to the river to find her alone. The river woman never appeared again. Her work was complete. That evening, as Nayara sat weaving by her fire, understanding arrived like the final piece of a pattern clicking into place. The river woman had not been a spirit in the way villagers spoke of spirits, some external force dispensing justice or magic. She was the collective presence of every woman who had ever reclaimed her dignity after abandonment, every wife who had chosen self-respect over false peace, every mother who taught her daughters that love should never require the surrender of one's soul. She appeared only when a woman stood at that specific crossroads, when the choice between mercy and wisdom would define everything that followed. She appeared to witness, to guide, to affirm that the path of self-preservation was not selfishness, but sacred responsibility. The river woman was every woman who had ever said enough and meant it, who had ever walked away from comfortable misery toward uncertain dignity. She was the part of Nayara that always knew the truth, but needed permission to act on it. Nayara smiled softly, understanding at last that she had not been saved by external forces. She had been reminded that she possessed the power to save herself. That was the only magic that mattered, the only blessing that truly transforms. Seasons turned as seasons must, and Nayara built a life that belonged entirely to herself. She did not seek another husband, nor did she close her heart to connection. She simply refused to define herself by anyone's presence or absence. Her compound became a refuge for women wrestling with impossible choices, a place where truth was spoken plainly and tears were honored but not required. She taught young girls that their worth was not measured by who wanted them, but how well they knew themselves. She showed older women that it was never too late to set down burdens they had carried too long. The village elders, recognizing her wisdom, granted her a seat in council meetings, an honor rarely given to women. Her name stopped being spoken with pity and began to be spoken with reverence. Remember what Nayara did, mothers told daughters. Remember how she chose herself when choosing him would have destroyed her. Her name became more than identity. It became instruction, warning, encouragement. It became a proverb whispered when women needed courage. Walk like Nayara, stand like Nayara, choose like Nayara. And in this way, her story multiplied, spreading from compound to compound, village to village, teaching lessons that could not be unlearned. The storyteller pauses here, allowing silence to settle like dust after a storm has passed. The fire crackles and pops in the darkness, sending sparks spiraling towards stars that have witnessed countless such stories throughout endless generations. The storyteller's voice drops low, intimate, as if sharing a secret too important to shout. Remember this tale when you are told forgiveness requires you to accept fresh wounds. Remember it when someone mistakes your patience for permission. Remember it when they test whether your silence means surrender. The flames cast dancing shadows on listening faces. A woman's care is a blessing, not a chain. A woman's love is a gift, not a debt. Her presence is a choice, not an obligation. And whoever mistakes her silence for weakness, her gentleness for helplessness,
her endurance for eternal tolerance, that person will learn always too late that the quietest decisions carry the deepest consequences. The storyteller lets the words settle, watching understanding dawn in eyes that reflect firelight. Kanu learns what many refuse to learn until ruin teaches them, that the hand which lifts you up is the same hand you should never force down. For when that hand opens and releases you, you fall not by curse, but by the simple, terrible truth of gravity. The fire burns low, the story is complete, and those who heard it carry it forward into the world changed.